You ever stand in a room full of people who share your last name and still feel like a stranger? That was me, 38 years old, commercial electrician out of Missoula, Montana, standing in the back row of my own sister's wedding like some distant cousin who forgot to RSVP. But here's the twist. I didn't just feel invisible. I wasn't even on the guest list. That's right. The only reason I got in was because Leia, my then girlfriend, was invited. My own flesh and blood introduced her on the engagement announcement. Not me. Not her older brother. Just Leia. She was tagged in the photo. I was cropped out. That kind of erasure doesn't happen by accident. I remember the moment it finally clicked. I was standing at the reception bar, waiting on a weak whiskey pour, and someone's drunk uncle asked me who I was there with. I told him I was the bride's brother, and the man looked me over, squinted like I was lying, and said, "Didn't know she had a brother." And the worst part? I didn't even blame him. See, growing up, my sister, Hannah, was always the golden one. Straight A's, piano recitals, prom queen, you name it. I was the background noise, the helper, the one who held the flashlight wrong while Dad fixed the sink. Even when I got my journeyman's license and started my own small business rewiring old ranch homes, it barely registered. I wasn't impressive, just stable, just boring. The wedding was just the most recent chapter in a very long book of Remember Your Place. And I did, quietly, bit my tongue, toasted their union. Smile for photos I was never going to be tagged in. Then went back to Missoula with Leia in the passenger seat, silent the whole ride home while she clutched my hand like she already knew what I was grieving. Not just the wedding, the illusion that family was anything more than a brand I didn't belong to. But here's where the story shifts. 3 years later, Leia and I got engaged. She didn't care that my savings weren't huge or that my family treated me like furniture. She loved me like I was the main character of something worth watching. So when we started planning our wedding, I asked her, point blank, if she would be okay with us not inviting my family. I expected a conversation, a compromise, but she just nodded and said, "Good." Now don't get me wrong. That decision came with fallout. Big one, nuclear-level guilt from my mother. Extended relatives I hadn't heard from in a decade, suddenly sending long-winded emails about healing. And what would your father think? My sister? Radio silence, until the week before the ceremony when she showed up at my job site, uninvited, and called the whole thing immature. Said I was letting some woman come between me and my roots. I almost laughed. Roots? These people were weeds, pulling every ounce of light and calling it love. We got married anyway. Just the two of us and a justice of the peace under a weathered old archway behind a diner in Phillipsburg. Small town. No stage. No performance. Just her and me and the silence I've been aching for my whole life. And standing there with her hand in mine, I felt something I never felt at any family event before. Seen. Free. And I didn't miss the background music of guilt one bit. The backlash didn't come all at once. It started slow, like a faucet someone forgot to turn off, all the way. A guilt-soaked voicemail from my mom 2 days after Leia, and I sent out the save the dates, saying she hoped I'd reconsider. That family wasn't perfect, but it was still family. She said that word like it had magic in it, like it could erase years of being the backup plan. Then came the texts. From cousins who hadn't spoken to me since the Bush administration. Each one pretending to be curious, supportive, then sliding in that uncomfortable line about how everyone was a little surprised not to see your folks on the guest list. Some even threw in a little passive dig about Leia, like maybe she's just nervous around your family. By the time my sister got involved, it had turned from passive pressure to full-blown manipulation. She messaged Leia directly, which was bold, considering they'd only spoken twice, and asked if there was any way she could convince me to let it go. Said it was breaking Mom's heart. Said Dad wasn't sleeping. Said she was really trying to bridge the gap, even though I was the one pushing everyone away. Leia didn't show me the message at first. She just sat on the edge of the bed one night, fiddling with the hem of her sleeve like she was unraveling herself. I asked her what was wrong. She said something that stuck with me more than anything else in that whole mess. She said, it's like they think love means showing up for them, even when they never showed up for you. And she was right. See, they only ever cared when I stepped off script. When I played the role, the reliable one, the fixer, the quiet son who mailed birthday cards and never asked for anything, I was tolerated. The second I made a decision for myself, suddenly I was selfish, disrespectful, cold. It all hit a boiling point a week before the ceremony. I was on a job in Deer Lodge, helping wire a barn conversion for a retired teacher who just wanted to live near horses, when my phone rang. It was Hannah. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, I picked up. She didn't ask how I was. Didn't even say hello. She went straight for the jugular. Said the whole family was talking, that I was ruining something sacred, that weddings were about unity, and couldn't I just swallow my pride for one damn day? And I wanted to say yes. I want to be the bigger person. But here's the truth I never admitted out loud, not even to myself. It wasn't pride I was protecting. It was peace. And I wasn't about to give it up for one more round of applause I'd never hear, in a room where I'd only ever been scenery. 2 days before the wedding, I got ambushed. Not the kind with yelling and crying and hand-wringing. No, my family's brand of drama is quieter, more surgical. They don't confront you. They arrive on your porch like grief in human form. It was just after 8 p.m., and I had just gotten back from checking the lighting setup at the park where Leia and I were going to hold the ceremony. No isle, no altar. Just a grassy bluff overlooking the Bitterroot River and a few chairs borrowed from a buddy's barn. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. I pulled into the driveway and saw them, all three, standing by the front steps. My mother, holding a Tupperware of something she probably made just to justify being there. My sister, arms crossed like she was preparing for war. And my dad, standing behind them like a shadow, trying to decide if he wanted to be part of this or not. I didn't invite them in. Instead, I stood there on the gravel, not even bothering to kill the engine. My mom stepped forward first. She said she didn't come to fight. Said she just wanted to talk. Then asked if maybe I'd reconsider, even just letting them watch from the back row. No photos. No drama. Just presence. But that was the thing. They never wanted presence. They wanted performance. A scene they could be part of. Redemption in the form of proximity. And maybe, in their minds, standing quietly at the back of the crowd would count as love. Hannah jumped in next, said I was being cruel, said I was punishing everyone for being imperfect. She even tried to make it sound noble, like I was breaking generational trauma or some nonsense she probably picked up from podcasts. But it was just noise. All of it. Carefully worded guilt bombs, wrapped in "we just care about you" packaging. And my dad, when he finally spoke, said the one thing that almost cracked me. He said, "This isn't how we raised you." And for a second, I almost agreed. But then I remembered the time I drove through a snowstorm to fix their heater, and they didn't even say thank you. Or when I lost my job 3 years ago, and no one called for 2 months, but they remembered to text me a list of chores the next time I visited. Or how, at every family dinner, my sister's boyfriends got more attention than I did. So I looked at them and said, as steady as I could, that the ceremony wasn't about them, that maybe it never was. And then I walked inside and left them standing there in the cold. I watched from the window as they stood in silence for a while, then slowly turned and left. No shouting, no last-minute speeches, just quiet defeat. And I thought to myself, this is how I know I'm doing the right thing. Because the peace that followed, it didn't feel like guilt. It felt like breathing after holding your lungs tight for too many years. The morning of the wedding, I woke up before the sun. Not because I was nervous. I wasn't. I'd expected nerves, the kind that make you double-check the rings or rehearse your vows one more time in the mirror. But instead, I felt calm. Still, like someone had finally turned the noise off. I made coffee the way I always do, black, slow, familiar. The smell filled the kitchen and curled around my shoulders like an old blanket. Leia was still asleep upstairs, and I didn't want to wake her. Not yet. I sat at the table with my mug and a faded postcard I kept tucked in a drawer. The front showed Flathead Lake in late summer, all blue and silver and stillness. My mom sent it to me when I was 19 and working a summer job in Billings. She'd written 3 lines. "We miss you. Be safe. Come home soon." That was the closest she ever got to saying she loved me. I used to keep it pinned to a corkboard. Somewhere along the way, I stopped looking at it. Now it just felt like a relic. A small piece of fiction that belonged to someone I used to be. By the time Leia came down, barefoot, hair in a messy twist, wearing one of my old flannels, I'd already packed the car and laid out the suits. She smiled when she saw me. Not the dramatic, movie-type smile. Just a quiet, tired one. The kind that said, "We made it." And that's when it hit me. The twist I didn't see coming. I wasn't sad. Not about them. Not anymore. The grief had done its job. Burned clean through. What was left wasn't bitterness or anger. It was just space. Space where their voices used to be. Space for something new. At the park, we kept it simple. No procession. No speeches. A friend of ours who got ordained online during the pandemic stood under the archway and read something he'd written himself. It was short, sweet, and exactly right. There were 22 people there. Friends. Coworkers. A couple of Leia's cousins who flew in from Reno. Every one of them smiling like they wanted to be there, not because they felt obligated. And when I looked at Leia, really looked, I realized she wasn't just the woman who saw me. She was the one who chose me. Not because I was the provider or the dependable one or the brother with the quiet job and the practical car. Not because she felt guilty or indebted, but because she saw me, all my silence, my awkwardness, my scars, and still leaned in. That kind of love doesn't ask you to perform. It just lets you breathe. We didn't have a reception, not in the traditional sense, but it was perfect. We took over the back room, where there was a scratched-up pool table and a broken neon sign that buzzed when it rained. Leia changed into jeans and boots. I loosened my tie and ordered us both burgers. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to joy, the real kind. The kind that doesn't need an audience. People trickled in. A couple of my crew guys from the job site brought a six-pack and a card with the words to the realest couple we know. One of Leia's former roommates made a toast with her beer held high and her eyes wet with honest pride. No one asked about cake. No one demanded a dance floor. And no one brought up my family. It was like the whole room had silently agreed. This isn't about who's missing. It's about who stayed. At one point, I stepped outside to get some air. The cold bit of my face, sharp and clean. I looked up at the sky, stars faint behind the clouds. And I suddenly remembered something from years back. I was maybe 21, back from trade school, and it was Hannah's birthday. We'd gone out to dinner as a family, steakhouse, white napkins, the whole thing. At the end, our parents handed her a small velvet box, and she opened it to find our grandmother's sapphire necklace. Everyone clapped. She teared up. I remember looking at our mom and asking, not accusing, just curious, if she was planning to pass anything down to me. She gave a tight smile and said, "Well, you're a guy. You don't really need heirlooms." And that stuck with me, not because of the necklace, but because of the casual finality in her voice. Like I wasn't someone who left footprints, just a shadow passing through the family photo. But now, standing outside that dive bar with a simple silver band on my finger and laughter echoing through the brick wall, I realized something. Maybe I didn't need a family heirloom. Maybe I was starting one. Later that night, after the bar emptied out and the last hug were exchanged under buzzing porch lights, Leia and I drove to a tiny rental cabin by Sealy Lake. No reception, no Wi-Fi, just a fireplace, a frayed quilt on the bed, and the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, just earned. She fell asleep first, her head on my chest, her breath steady. I lay there in the dark, listening to the wood pop in the stove, my mind still trying to process the shape of my life now that it no longer bent around other people's expectations. And that's when something strange happened. I didn't replay the fights. I didn't think about the guest list, or the porch ambush, or the decades of being second best. I thought about my nephew, Hannah's kid, Sam. He's 8, big eyes, talks like he's memorizing everything. I remember once, at a family barbecue, he sat beside me while the adults passed dishes around and ignored my presence entirely. He asked why I never smiled like the rest of them. I told him I was just tired. He nodded like he understood more than he should and said, "I think tired people are usually the honest ones." I hadn't thought about that moment in years. But now, lying in a cabin that smelled faintly of cedar and rain, I found myself hoping he'd grow up and see through it all. The performances, the favoritism, the way certain families weaponize love to keep you compliant. I hoped he'd recognize the pattern early and break it. Because that's the real legacy, isn't it? Not jewelry or old recipes or the right to sit at the big table. It's the ability to name the dysfunction and choose something different. I couldn't save my childhood. Couldn't rewrite the years I spent begging for crumbs and calling it connection. But I could damn well make sure the story ended with peace. And maybe, if I was lucky, it would begin again with something better. The next morning, my phone had 17 missed calls. 4 from my mother, 3 from my sister, 1 from my father, a rarity, which meant Hannah probably handed him the phone and told him exactly what to say. The rest? Unknown numbers, likely relatives trying to mediate from the sidelines. That, or group text gone rogue. I didn't answer a single one. I just watched the notifications pile up while Leia made eggs in a skillet that crackled like campfire kindling. She didn't say anything when she saw my screen, just slid a mug toward me and kissed the top of my head like she was sealing the silence in place. But eventually, curiosity won. I opened the last voicemail first. It was my mother, her voice brittle and shaking, like she was rehearsing pain for a stage she hadn't been invited to. She said they were hurt, that they'd been waiting all night for a call, that they saw photos on social media, people tagging us in group shots under the arch, arms thrown around shoulders like we're the luckiest people alive. She said she felt erased. That was the word she used. Erased. And I almost dropped the phone laughing. Not because I thought it was funny, but because it was surreal hearing that from the same woman who once cropped me out of a family Christmas card photo because she didn't like the way my jacket looked. Erased? Lady, I've been a ghost at your table for years. Still, I didn't call her back. I didn't respond to any of them because I knew what was coming next, the shift. The moment when sorrow curdles into spite. When we just want to understand turns into, how dare you embarrass us? And sure enough, 2 days later it happened. Hannah posted a passive-aggressive memoir-length caption under a photo of Sam holding a flower bouquet at her own wedding. It began with, "Family means forgiveness, even when others don't show up," and ended with, "We rise above." Always. No names, of course, but enough breadcrumbs to choke on. Leia saw it before I did. She didn't say anything, just handed me the phone with that same calm expression she wore when she parallel parked. Focused, silent, deadly accurate. I read the caption twice, then turned off my phone, because I knew they weren't grieving the loss of me. They were grieving the loss of control. You'd think that would have been the end of it. The drama, the veiled posts, the guilt grenades tossed over digital fences. But it wasn't. A week after we got back from the cabin, a letter showed up. Not an email, not a text, a real envelope. My name in blue ink. Return address? My parents' house. Leia saw it first in the mail pile and froze. She asked if I wanted her to open it. I told her no. I said I'd handle it. Truth is, I waited 2 days. I kept it on the kitchen counter, untouched. Like a live wire I wasn't sure I wanted to ground. Part of me hoped it was something real. An apology, a confession, anything that sounded like someone had finally taken a second to sit with themselves and actually feel something. But it wasn't that. When I finally opened it, I found a typed letter. Formal, cold, structured like a cease and desist. Not quite legalese, but close enough to make your jaw clench. 3 pages of explanations about how I'd misunderstood things. How Hannah didn't mean to exclude me. How the family had always loved me deeply, even if they weren't great at showing it. Then the kicker. We hope you and your wife can find it in your hearts to reconnect for the sake of future family gatherings. Not for love, not for healing, but for the convenience of future gatherings. Like we were furniture they forgot to dust off and were now politely asking to return. At the bottom, my mom had written one line in her handwriting, like a PS she thought might humanize it all. "You're always welcome at our table." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Thought about all the years I'd been at that table, quiet, invisible, useful, and how not once did anyone ask if I wanted to be there. Being welcome and being wanted are not the same thing. So I folded the letter in half, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it in the drawer next to the postcard from Flathead Lake. Let them sit together. Let them rot side by side. 2 artifacts of a family that never really saw me, only the version they wished I'd be. It's funny, isn't it? How grief doesn't always announce itself with tears or screaming. Sometimes it just settles into your daily routines like dust on a windowsill. Quiet, persistent, easy to ignore until the light hits just right. After the letter, I didn't rage. I didn't break anything. I just started noticing all the little ways I'd built my life around absence. Like how I never planned holidays without checking if my sister was hosting first, even when I wasn't invited. Or how I still kept my voicemail inbox half empty, just in case someone from the family finally said something that sounded like love. Or how I hesitated every time I reached for joy. Real joy, because deep down I've been taught that anything too loud, too self-chosen, would only bring criticism. That's what they don't tell you about being the quiet kid. You don't just learn to be silent. You learn to expect silence in return. Leia noticed, of course. She always does. One night we were in the garage, organizing boxes we'd never fully unpacked after moving in, and she pulled out an old shoebox labeled Mom's Photos. I hadn't seen it in years. Inside were loose snapshots, some blurry, some faded, all carrying that distinct ache of being both precious and pointless. There was one of me at a junior high science fair, standing next to a model volcano that barely worked. In the background, you could see Hannah front and center at her own display. Everyone clustered around her, and there I was off to the side. Again, Leia sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through them while I just stood there like a man watching his old life play out in silent film. At some point, she looked up at me and said, carefully, like she was touching a bruise, that I didn't have to keep these if they hurt. And I said the only honest thing I could. They don't hurt. They just remind me I was never really there. Not in the way that mattered. Not in the way that got remembered. There was one photo I kept. Not for the reason you'd expect. It was taken in the backyard during one of those summer cookouts where no one ever really talks. They just orbit each other in folding chairs, trading polite weather updates and pretending that silence is normal. In the photo, I'm standing near the grill, not manning it, just close enough to look useful, but not important enough to be given tongs. My posture's stiff, hands in my pockets, half smile that doesn't reach my eyes. But what caught me, all these years later, wasn't me. It was Leia. She was in the background, turned halfway toward me, watching. Her expression was hard to read, thoughtful, maybe a little wary. But it was the first time, looking at that photo now, that I realized she'd seen it. All of it. The performative warmth, the pecking order, the way people only made eye contact when it was convenient. And she stayed. That's what hit me like a punch to the ribs. She knew what kind of family I came from. She'd witnessed the quiet rankings, the invisible lines. She saw how I disappeared in plain sight, and she didn't flinch. It wasn't pity. It wasn't rescue. It was something slower, something deeper, a kind of knowing that said, you don't have to explain it. I already understand. I put that photo in a frame, not because it was beautiful, but because it was true. It reminds me that the most important moments of our lives rarely look cinematic. No sweeping gestures, no dramatic confrontations, just a woman in the background, quietly choosing to see what everyone else ignored. And me, finally realizing that being noticed, genuinely noticed, is the most radical thing that's ever happened to me. It's been 8 months since the wedding. We still haven't spoken. Not out of anger. Not anymore anyway. It's just that silence, once you get used to it, becomes a kind of sanctuary. Not the echoing void people imagine. No, it's more like soft insulation. No unexpected texts. No tiptoeing around someone else's fragile ego. No having to explain, yet again, why your boundaries aren't acts of war. And in that silence, I started noticing how much room there was to grow. Leia and I plant a garden. Tomatoes, basil, the kind of vegetables that die fast if you neglect them. A cruel metaphor I chose not to mention out loud. We started eating at the table every night. No phones, just real food and words that didn't require translation. I picked up woodworking again. Nothing fancy, just shelves and birdhouses and one lopsided stool we both pretend to love. She took up stained glass, and now our kitchen window catches the morning sun like a broken rainbow. We've built something here, quietly, deliberately. And some nights, when the world feels impossibly heavy, I sit on the porch and remind myself of one truth. I didn't walk away from a family. I walked toward a life. Because here's the thing no one ever tells you, especially if you grew up like I did, always being reminded to be grateful for what you have. You're allowed to leave the table if love is no longer being served. And I did. I left. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I needed an apology. But because peace finally knocked louder than guilt. And I answered.